Brazil, 2023.
It started with an unsettling feeling, like a chill creeping up my spine. We were at the beach, one of those secluded spots where the wind blows constantly, and the sound of the waves is hypnotic. It was a hot summer afternoon, the kind of day when the heat makes the sand feel like an oven and the horizon seems to shimmer. I, Anna, Joao, and Carla were digging in the sand, just playing around, like any group of kids would. Anna, always the most adventurous among us, was a little further away, digging frantically near the dunes. Suddenly she screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain, it was a scream of surprise, perhaps even fear. When we ran over to her, we saw that she was holding an old, dirty, and worn-out doll. "Look what I found!" Anna said, her voice trembling. The doll seemed to have been buried for decades, with peeling paint and one missing eye, leaving a hollow socket that seemed to stare back at us. In the following minutes, as we dug with more intensity, we found other toys, a wooden cart with rusted wheels, a porcelain doll with a sinister smile that seemed to defy time, and a metal spinning top that made a strange sound when it spun, like a distant lament. It was then that we all felt, simultaneously, that we were being watched. I looked up and saw, in the distance near the dunes, a child watching us. The child was motionless, dressed in old clothes that looked like they came from a faded photo album. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. But when I called the others to look, the figure vanished as if it had never been there. The toys we found were fascinating and frightening at the same time. Each of us felt a strange connection to them, as if they had been left there for us to find. We decided to play with them, not really understanding what we were doing. That night, as the full moon cast a silvery glow over the beach, we heard distant laughter. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comforts. It was a sound that made the skin crawl. I looked in the direction of the sound and saw again the figures of the children. This time, there were three, standing side by side, watching silently. Their features were indistinct, but their eyes glowed with a supernatural intensity. Every time an adult approached, whether one of our parents calling us for dinner or a stranger walking a dog, the figures would disappear, dissolving into the darkness like smoke in the wind. It was as if only we could see them, as if we were trapped in a parallel reality where these spirits roamed. We tried to explain what we saw to our parents, but they laughed, thinking it was just our vivid imagination. "Kids and their stories," they would say, while we, with heavy hearts and growing fear, knew that something was terribly wrong on that beach. As the days passed, the presence of the children became more intense. They didn't just watch. Now, we felt their presence around us, like shadows following us wherever we went. At one point I was alone, playing with the metal spinning top, when I heard a whisper in my ear. "Help us!" I turned quickly, but no one was there. The feeling of being watched was constant, and panic began to set in. Our games, which had once been carefree and joyful, were now dark and full of tension. Every sound, every movement seemed amplified, and the beach, which had once been a refuge of fun, had turned into a place of fear and mystery. The toys we found began to seem more sinister, as if they were imbued with the energy of those who had owned them before. And then, we started to understand that the toys were not just buried in the sand. They were buried in the history of those missing children, who still wandered, trapped between our world and the next, desperately seeking help. The tension among us was unbearable. Each of us felt the weight of something sinister looming over our heads. Joao, always the most curious of the group, decided that we needed to know more about those toys and the children who continued to haunt us. It was he who suggested we search for answers in the small local library, a place we rarely visited. The library was old, with dark wooden shelves and a smell of dust and old books. The librarian, an elderly lady with gray hair, looked at us with curiosity as we searched through old newspaper records and city archives. "What exactly are you looking for?" she asked. We hesitated for a moment before explaining. Her eyes narrowed, and she sighed deeply, as if she knew exactly what was going on. She led us to a back room, where dusty files were kept. "Decades ago, there was an incident," she began, flipping through the yellow documents. A group of children disappeared on that beach. They were never found, and the case went cold over time. We stood in silence, processing the gravity of her words. The files contained old photos of the missing children. Looking at those black and white images, we felt a chill. The clothes they were wearing were the same as those worn by the children we saw from a distance. It was impossible not to make the connection. "These children, they're still there," Joao said, his voice trembling. "And they want to tell us something." We returned to the beach with a sense of purpose mixed with deep terror. We knew we needed to understand what the spirits wanted. That night, we decided to stay up late, hoping the children would appear again. The full moon cast a cold light over the sand. We sat in a circle, holding the toys we had found. The silence around us was palpable, and the sound of the waves seemed distant. It was then that they appeared, the children, with their bright eyes and indistinct faces, closer than ever. Anna, with a courage I didn't know she had, whispered, "What do you want from us?" One of the children, a girl with braids and a faded dress, stepped forward. She seemed to try to speak, but no sound came out. That's when Joao had an idea. "Let's use the toys," he said, with a strange determination in his voice. "Maybe they can communicate through them." We placed the toys in the center of the circle and waited. The girl with braids picked up the porcelain doll, and to our horror, the doll's lips began to move. "We were playing here when it happened," said a weak and ethereal voice, seeming to come from another world. "We were taken, and couldn't find our way back." The fear we felt was overwhelming, but we knew we couldn't run away. "What can we do to help?" I asked, trying to stay calm. The doll looked up at me with its empty gaze. "We need to be remembered. We need to be set free." We then understood that the toys were the key. They were not just objects, they were anchors keeping the spirits trapped in that place. The children wanted the toys to be buried again, but this time with a ritual of remembrance and respect. We decided to hold a ceremony, a kind of farewell. The next morning, we dug a deep grave in the sand where we had found the toys. Each of us said a few words, remembering the children we had never known but with whom we shared an inexplicable connection. We placed the toys in the grave and, together, began covering them with sand. That's when we felt a change. The air seemed lighter, and the feeling of being watched disappeared. When we finished, we looked around and saw, for the last time, the children. They were smiling, their faces full of gratitude and peace. Slowly, they began to disappear, dissolving into the air like mist in the sun. We knew we had done the right thing. But at the same time, a part of us would never forget that experience. The beach returned to its peaceful state, but for us, there would always be a shadow, a reminder of those dark days and the lost children.